Hello everybody, it's Claire here from Sewing by Claire, and we've got a sunny day over here in France. And so I just thought that we would get started on part 3 of our sew along for the Alex Shorties and the Sydney Dungarees by 5Berries patterns. And in part 1 we looked at all of the preparation, and there was quite a lot there. It was quite a long video for you to get through, but hopefully lots of little gems in there that you can use. In part 2 we then worked on the frills, the straps and the pockets. And in part 3, we're going to get on and finish the dungarees. Hopefully we'll start sewing them anyway and see how far we get. And we will look to put together the main dungarees so that we've got a garment that we can be proud of and that we're really happy to see our child wearing. So come sew with me and we'll get started and do it together. So the first thing I want you to do is just to locate your front lining for your dungarees and separate that from your pattern piece, putting your pattern piece away nice and neat and tidy. And we're going to work with the wrong side of our lining first off. And I'm just going to give this a quick iron because it's been folded up while we were travelling. Just flatten that out a little bit so that it's got no puckers underneath anywhere where we're going to be working on it. There's a couple of things we need to do with this just now. So the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to locate our interfacing part A, which is this one here with the curvy edge. And we're going to fuse the bobbly side of the interfacing. So remember I've said about interfacing before has a bobbly side, which is the glue. And the bobbly side is going to fit onto our pattern piece. Let's do one piece at a time because it's too big. And we're going to put them on the either side just here. Now, if your interfacing overlaps anywhere, I would suggest you just snip it off with your scissors because it will stick to your pressing mat or your ironing board cover if you don't. So it's just a little slither I needed to take off there. And just be careful where you put it because it will, if it gets under your iron or under somewhere you don't want it, then it will stick on there. Oh, mine's not wanting to lie down flat. Okay, and once that's in place, I'm going to take our press cloth, so your tea towel, I'm using the silk organza one, but whichever you use, and then we're going to just press down and just bond this in place. The heat of the iron melts the glue dots on the back and then adheres that to the wrong side of your lining, because it's got to be on this interfacing is hidden. You don't see this at all. It's just like secret support. So we just give that on there, a little bit of steam maybe just to make that go through. And it does take a little bit of adhering, so you know, don't just give it one quick flick over and think it's done. Just make sure that it's nicely on there because we want it on there forever. Okay, so that's that one on. And let's just do the other one now. Move our iron across, or our fabric across should I say. This one needs a little trim as well. Keep that out of the way of your ironing surface. There we go. Should fit really nicely because it's just basically one of the pattern pieces, isn't it, already? And that's the bobbly side down again. Let's give that some heat too. Just takes a few seconds just to get that to adhere. So those are the first two pieces we want to get on. A little bit of steam sometimes just helps. Depends on the manufacturer's instructions for your interfacing. Sometimes they say don't put any steam near them, other parts do. And then as you can see here, so I can't pick off the one that's already cooled now. I can't pick that off my fabric, and that's exactly how you want it. Don't try and peel it while it's still warm though, because it will peel off for you. And then the other piece that we want to be on our lining, our dungaree. Then we've got our interfacing parts B as well, and they're going to just go inside the lining as well, just at the top of the bib area up here, because they're going to reinforce where we put the buttonholes for the lining, for the buttons on top of the straps to come through. And again, just give that plenty of heat and a bit of steam. Just make sure that that's nicely on there underneath your press mat, underneath your press cloth. And again there, right, I'm going to take off my tails and my overlocking. I have overlocked this all the way round, but as we said before, when we start the actual construction, you may choose to, lots of this morning, isn't there? You may choose to interfacing, neating yours as we go along, and we'll talk about that as we do go. So that's the prep all done for the lining piece, apart from that tail to come off. And then we're going to move now over onto the front the back lining. That was the front lining. Take our pattern piece off, keep that somewhere safe. And then the bits that go on the back here is this pattern piece here, which is the back inseam. Sorry, not back inseam, the back interfacing just for down these sides just here. This might be a little bit long. Okay, so we take our interfacing for the back now of our dungaree lining, and we're going to just fuse that on. Now, don't worry about fusing over the top of the tailor's tacks, because we will still be able to pull the threads through those. Just do the other side. Just try to avoid moving your interfacing or folding it whilst it's still really... I got that the wrong way up then. While it's still warm, because that will just affect how it adheres. But just make sure each time before you put your iron down on this interfacing that you've got it the right way round. Doesn't take long to do. So that's 2 pieces of interfacing we're putting on the back lining, and we've put 4 individual pieces of interfacing on the front. Now, while we've got the back of the lining in our hands, the other thing that I would suggest, that if you wanted to put any labels onto this on the inside of this garment, then now's the time to do it, because it's very easy to forget and then it becomes more difficult as it goes along. Now, what I mean by that is that I've got a little label here which just says it's 100% cotton, and it just is one of the ones that I had left over when I did my clothing business. So I'm going to just find the middle point of the back lining, which is there. Just put a little finger press in there. And then I'm just going to put my label just underneath, so it just tucks down like that. And I'm going to put a pin just to hold it in place for now, because I will just sew that on, because we don't have to sew this bottom edge of the lining. Oh, let's make sure it goes nice and straight. So that then will remind me that that needs to be sewn on. Likewise, when I put the label on the back of the pocket, if I was putting that on the not the pocket, but the label itself on the inside, or you wanted to put handmade by or whatever, then you could then put that on now, because once this is all constructed, you won't be able to get up to this top part of the lining where you might want to put it, or you could put it down the bottom, wherever you want. It's just easier whilst it's in the flat. And you can get labels like these just printed really quite economically on Etsy, and they really do elevate a garment as well. And washing instructions are always useful whenever you're giving somebody something that's been handmade, because they may not know. And so the wash instructions are on the back of that one with keep away from fire, and then just some details on there. So right. That's all the prep for the lining then. So now we're going to move on to the main parts of our dungarees. The next piece that we're going to locate is the back pockets, so the back section of the dungarees, and take the pattern piece off. And if you remember, we marked our back pocket placement with our tailor's tacks. So let's take these out. So we've got 2 mirrored copies. So there's one here with my 2 marks on for my back pocket there, and the other one with my mark for my back pocket here. And then you want to be taking your triangular bottomed pockets that we prepped before. I've got one with the label and one without, and then we're going to line up the points so they're on the same line with those tailor's tacks that we've made. And then I'm just going to put a pin in, and I put my pins in towards the corners of the pocket to hold those straight. So I don't put it down the seam, I put it with the point of the pin pointing into the corner of the pocket, and again here. Because I think that just means that you can get closer to your seam without actually having to take your pattern out. So without taking your pins out. Hope you understand Claire talk. Right. Now at the moment I have still got in at the bottom of my pockets the stitching, which was the stitching that we put round. Can you remember when we ironed it up to those marks? So I think I might take those out now because I think they'll be easier to take out and they've served their purpose. So I'll just take you off screen while I just do that, because you can also do the same should you wish, because it will be easier just to take those stitches out now. And as I say, we don't need them anymore because we've got a lovely ironed edge. And if you just take one bit out, because they still might be quite loose, then we can pull that through and it's really quick. Remember to take the stitching out the underneath as well. And you'll see the snip that off, it'll just pull off. And then because we've steamed that so nicely, that'll all lay flat again quite easily. I'll just take this one off while I just do that as well. And I'll be back to where I am. Hold on one second. So this is my pocket, the way I've got it on. So I've just lined up the top corners of the pocket with the tailor's tacks. Now mine's slightly off, so I've obviously used slightly more seam allowance down the sides than the original pocket, or that's the size 5 and I've then done a size 3 pocket, whichever. But so long as I don't worry too much about that, so long as I'm on the same line, and I'm also, if I'm in any doubt, then I'm moving the pocket in towards the edge that's got the centre crotch on it, so that keeps those pockets slightly in, and I think that's the best way. We're not going to sew over this top bit, so we leave the top bit open so they can pop their treats in there or treasures. But then what I've done is I've put a pin pointing towards the corner here, again down the sides and at each of the corners, and before and after this point at this bottom here, and then again here and here. And so you can get, with the pins this close, you can get really almost onto that pin before you have to take it out, and then you're onto your next pin. And you also want to make sure that when you lie your garment flat, or your garment piece flat on your work surface, that everything is lying really flat for you for when you want to sew that over. So let's just get the other one ready now. So again, I've got my marks here. Now these marks are smaller, but they're still there. And I'll get my pocket. And so I'm just going to line those corners up first with my tailor's tacks. And that way then we make sure we get the same angle on the pockets on both sides, because we will notice that if it's not the same on both sides. So make sure your pattern piece is the right way up as well. So this narrow pointy bit here, that's the top. Then this is the side placket here for putting our buttons on for closing the dungaree so that they can fit nicely. Okay, let's just turn this round so we can pop that pin in and just hold it in that corner. So do the top two corners first, then I generally smooth down and do the 2 sides before I then go on to the bottom. That way I can just make sure that everything's sitting nice and flat for me. And all the time you're just making sure that it's still lying flat for you when you see it laid down on a work surface. Pin into the corner. Just making sure I get as much of that as I can, as close as I can. Other corner. That's there. And then I'm putting 2 pins, one either side of the little point, for the bottom of the pocket too. Okay, so the next stage we're going to do now is we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we are going to sew these pockets down. I'm going to be using a top stitch again for this, so we're going to put our stitch length up to a 3, and we're going to turn our speed on our I can't see it very well with the pattern matching, but there's the edge of the pocket, look, and again there. And down the bottom here, so you can see the pins with the heads all into the middle so they don't get in the way. So let's get our machine set up. So now, because I've got my pockets positioned, I'm going to take the long tailor's tacks out, because we're finished with those. They were there just to mark the top corners, and we've got those pinned down nicely. If you're nervous and not sure you've got yours in the right place, you can always leave them in till the end. It's just an idea of mine just to get rid of those. So we're going to start with the needle down, and I am going to, I kind of like to sew so I'm right on the edge of the pocket. It's up to you whether you have your needle to the right or to the left. I think I get more accuracy if I put my needle across to the left. And we want to just get the edge of the pocket. Now the other thing that I'm going to do with the pocket is I'm going to draw a bit of a triangle. So I'm going to start, oh, let me just start here. So I'm going to start here, so that's the top of the pocket there. I'm going to sort of come down a couple, go up a couple of stitches and across a couple of stitches before I come down. And you get this little triangle in the top corner, which just then gives a bit of extra reinforcement. So if you've only got your stitches coming down, just down that seam, it puts a lot of strain on just a few threads of your fabric. Whereas if you do that little triangle at the top corner, again, it just adds a little detail, but it just makes it a little bit more robust, really. So let's put my stitch length up to 3. I've got a hold of my threads, and I'm right on the edge of my dungarees when I start. So again, I'm not going to back tack, I'm just going to start stitching. So perhaps so I've done 3 stitches down. Oops. And then I'm going to come across now. So I can take out that pin because that top corner is now anchored with those 3 stitches. And I'm just coming across to an angle now and do another 3 or 4 stitches. 1, 2, probably 3. Put my needle down in my work. And then I'm going to come across 1 stitch. It should take me back to the corner of my dungarees. And now I can stitch down the edge of those dungarees. I'm just not happy with that placement at the moment. Let me just adjust that. Okay, so let's go down now. Take it nice and steady. Turn your speed down. It's not a time for zooming. Just take it nice and steady. You're looking for nice, accurate stitches close to the edge. So come to this pin down the side. So let's take that one out. And then we're going back, carry on back down again. Just keep an eye on the edge of the fabric and where it is positioned underneath your presser foot. And then where you want to stop. So I'm going to stop right in the corner there, and then we're going to pivot. So leave your needle in your work, lift your presser foot up, and then we're going to then go across the bottom here. Just trying to keep to the same seam allowance all the way around. If you vary massively, it'll just look messy. So that's why we're taking the time. We're close to the point now, so take that pin out, and that'll take us right down. If you want to as well, you can use your awl, your pointy tool, and just keep your awl on that point, and it'll stop it from shifting away from you as you get close to it. So again, you want to stop at the bottom of that point. We'll start to move off it before we take the next pin out, because we can get a bit closer first. Oops. The dungarees themselves are actually very quick to do. I mean, obviously you're watching me do it and I'm having to explain what I'm doing. But when you're actually making these on your own, it's quite a quick little sew. And they do look really neat. Yes, I'm happy with that so far. So again, you can just use your awl just to hold things in place whilst you're getting close. Pin out. And then we're going to remember to do that little triangle bit again at the top of this next pocket. Just to reinforce that corner. So I'm going to come up straight first, making sure I keep to the same seam allowance so it looks nice and neat. One more. I'm going to go across a couple here. Make sure you've not got your work folded underneath. And then we're going to go back down into this corner here. You try and touch that same piece of stitching that you've already done. Okay. So leave some long threads because we'll do that invisible finishing that we do. So here's our pocket all sewn on. So I've got the little triangles just there. Hopefully you can see that there. And then we've not stitched across the top because we want that to be opening. But then we've got the stitching all the way down the bottom, all nice and neat across here to the point, across to here, and then back up again. So all that needs to happen then is we need to take our threads through. So if you remember, we pull on the thread underneath first, see if we can get it through that way. I might have gone over mine when I did my second lot of stitches. And if we have, we're not going to worry, we're just going to get our sewing needle and just go over that. Yeah, I think that's split that thread for me. So what I'm going to do is leave that one where it is. I'm just going to get a hand sewing needle. It was. So I'll hold on to the threads I've got left. Then I'll tie the knot. Use the end of the needle just to scoop that thread through because my fingers are quite big. And then I'm going to thread this one through first, and I'll come back for the other one and show you how we do the other one because the other one's snapped off quite thick. So I'm going to come out now between the two sides of the stitching. So that's between the edge of the pocket and the thread there. So I can just take that through at the moment. And then now I can see where I am going to thread that down, fabric out the way, down through the seam that we've just stitched to hide that thread. So it's not gone through on the right side and it's not come through on the wrong side, it's just in the middle. And that, giving that a long tail just means that it holds, doesn't come unravelled quite so easily. Now on the one where we've got this little bit, what I do is I thread my needle, I've put my needle through into my fabric first. Make sure it's not gone through the other side. Then I take whatever I've got left because I've got a really short edge there. Can you see how that needle's just sticking out? Just the eye of the needle is almost sticking out. You take a little bit off the edge here just to make it easier to thread. And then with the little scraps I've got left, just going to thread that through the eye of the needle. There we go. Oh, gently, so I don't lose it. And then if you just put pressure, pull it through so that as it goes down, so when you get down to the eye, so the eye is just about to go through your fabric, just pull your threads through again so you've got the maximum amount of thread through, and then just give it a pull. And that will just put that end just inside your fabric as well. You might say, why are you bothering? But it's up to you. You have to decide if you want to go to the trouble or not, but I'm just showing you what you can do if you want to. And then on this one here should be easier to see the end and pull that through. Yep, there it is. Little loop. That pulls everything through to the same side. And again, you've got no messy backwards and forward reverse stitching on this then. Just thread that needle through and just finish showing off that. You know what I'm going to do with this, don't you? So thread it through between the, right where the needle is, but go through between the two sides of the fabric and come up just down the side of that pocket. And then once you're there, you can then thread your needle through down that little channel made from where your seam is, down through there, and then pull on that. And you've got a lovely, neat finish. Because again, there's dungarees on the back of the pocket bits aren't lined, so the lining doesn't come all the way down here. But as you can see, that gives you a really nice, neat finish on the back of those pockets on the inside. And that's the front. So I'm going to do the same now with the other pocket and stitch it on the same way and neaten it off, and then we'll come on to the next stage. Okay, so I've just finished doing the second one. So we've got our two pockets on our dungarees, looking all nice, one there and one there. Now in the instructions it does say that you can go around a second time should you wish, and you could either use a double needle if you wanted to. You wouldn't be able to do the turn corner bit at the top because double needles are really difficult to change direction with sometimes. Or the other thing that you can do is if you keep the same placement with your needle when you do your first pass, so just like I have done here, but then what you can do is you can go back to your seam again, and if you move your needle a couple of clicks across, and reposition, then you can do a line adjacent to it by the side of it, and it will actually make those more robust. And if you look in the instructions that you got with your pattern, you'll see how the designer has done that herself with her stitching. I'm keeping this neat, well, not neat, I'm keeping this simple because I think that's the kind of way that I'd like mine to look. But if I was, say, doing a denim and I got a nice golden coloured thread, that would make a really nice effect just to go around again and just to do that second row of stitching on the pockets and some of the other areas just to reinforce it. But that's how I would do it. I would line up my presser foot with the edge of the fabric. You do the first pass, and then I would move my needle over a couple of clicks, 2 or 3 clicks, and then line my presser foot on the same place for the original pass. Don't try and eyeball it. Don't try and just go free form on it, because that can go really wobbly when you're doing that, and it's really frustrating when it's a top thread and a contrast so you can see it. So always use the same point on your machine perhaps as a reference, and move your needle instead and see if that helps your accuracy, because I think you'll find that to be really useful. Okay, so that was just that other little bit. And then the next thing that we're going to do now is we are going to put these together. So I want you to orientate yourself. So we've got the top of the dungarees here with this tall part, and then we've got this side little flap that sticks out. So when we lay these together, we want the pockets to be on top of each other, and we want the little side flaps to be together, but we're not sewing that side. We're going to go right up to the top here, and we're going to match our crotch point as well here, and we're going to start and pin this, because we're going to do this long centre back seam now. So we're going to pin it so I've matched those 2 points there and put a pin in there and come up to the top here. Now, if you're sewing the outside of your Alex Shorties, you'll find that you don't have this pointed section at the top here, because you've got a separate yoke piece that goes on the back there. So I'll tell you what to do with that at the moment. So join your pieces up with the crotch seam as I'm doing here now. Make sure you put in as many pins as you are comfortable with using. And just make sure that's all going to lie flat, and it should do. We're going to change our stitch down to a 2.2, which is our construction, and I'm going to change my needle position back to 3.5, which is the middle position, so that I get my 1 centimetre seam allowance right. Oops. And then we're going to just stitch down this seam, and we're going to reverse stitch at the start and the bottom. Now what we have to, I can turn my speed up again, can't I, now that we've finished top stitching? Make it a bit easier, a bit quicker. Needle in my work before I take my pins out so that we don't get a jig in the stitches. And so let's just keep this going down. So I've got using my 1 centimetre mark on my base plate for my sewing machine. And we need that 1 centimetre seam allowance to be accurate, because when we put our lining on, because our lining's been cut on the fold, it's taken account of that 1 centimetre seam allowance. And so if we do 1.5 centimetres, then the lining won't fit, or if we do less than 1.5 centimetres, less than 1 centimetre, again the lining won't fit. So this is where accuracy comes in. So get used to looking on your base plate and just feeding your fabric around there. We're coming up towards the curve. So we go as far as we can, making sure that everything in front of the needle plate is straight. Okay, when we start to curve, we're just going to leave our needle in our work, lift our presser foot and just tilt it slightly. Take that final, well not final pin out, but almost final pin out. A little bit more, and then we're going to tilt again. Few more stitches and tilt again, and this will help us go around that curve nice and smoothly. You can pull your fabric, but it is easier if you just get used to pivoting. It becomes second nature in the end. Sometimes I forget to tell you because I just do it so automatically now, and you'll be the same with yours too. I'm going to go right the way up to this point here. We're going to reverse again. Cut our threads, and cut our starting threads, and then we've got our dungarees join together for the back with our 2 little patch pockets on there. Okay, so this is all starting to come together. Now the actual seam here is actually going to be pressed towards one side and then top stitched down. So because if you open the seam up and then you top stitch it, that can put quite a lot of pressure on that centre back seam. So you tend to find that in some jeans and what have you, they then will do either 1 or 2 rows of stitching, and it attaches this centre back seam allowance down onto the fabric, but that makes a really, really robust and strong seam then, especially for when little ones are playing. So what I would do now is take this to the ironing board and just iron all the way along this seam. We don't need to clip this curve because it's going to press over to one side, so that will all lie flat as we start to stitch it as it goes through, and you'll see how that kind of stretches because it's a little bit of a bias, so we've got enough stretch there. So you don't need to be clipping into that. If you were going to neaten your seams now, you could now either pink this seam or you can zigzag the seam, but I would do, whereas I've done mine separately, I said to you at the start, didn't I, that there might be some seams that I could have left and done as one, but that would make that a lot neater then. So I would then just go down, just overlock, pink or zigzag those 2 seam edges together before then pressing them to one side. So that would be my recommendation. But you should have this little point at the top here as well, which is all part of the feature of the dungarees. So first of all, I'm just going to press my dungarees flat, my seam flat, the one that we've just stitched. And you'll get used to just ironing these seams flat because it always gives you such a much nicer finish if you can get used to doing that. So that's gone through there. And now that we've now pressed the seam flat, I'm going to open this out, keeping the curve flat on my ironing board, and I'm going to press over. In this case, I'm pressing over towards the right. I don't think there's a right way or a wrong way, it's just your preference really. I'm going to press that over to the right, all the way along. And it's just going to, I'm just folding out these creases as I go, as you can see here, the creased area. And that will then just make it a nice open seam for me. And if your child is sensitive to seams, the other seam that you could do along, finish you could do along here is a flat felled seam. Now I've not done that on these dungarees, and I've not got a skill builder for that one yet, but if you Google flat felled seam, and I'll put it up in here for you so you know how that's actually spelt, then that would be another good seam to do down the back of these dungarees. And that's what we've got at the moment, just really nicely pressed open, so no folds in that at all. And what I'm going to do now is I'm now going to top stitch down to hold the seam allowance down with another row of stitches. Now because I'm only doing 1 row of stitches on my pockets, I'm just going to do 1 row of stitches down here. However, if I'd done 2 rows of stitches on my pockets, I probably would do a double row down here. So again, if you wanted to use a double needle, you can do, and I have got a skill builder on my video on my channel for setting up a domestic machine for a twin needle. Or you could do what I said before, do 1 pass first, move your needle over a couple of clicks, line it up the same way and just redo it, and you'll find that that'll give you a really good finish too. So let me get my machine set up for a 3 length stitch, and we'll top stitch down this. So you need to get used to just changing the settings on your machine, but that's really good to get you familiar with it and how you make the best of your machine and the stitches and features it's got. So I'm following this little mark on my machine just here in the centre of there, and I've got my needle at 3.5, so halfway across the edge of my presser foot, and that's what I keep my eye on. Turn my speed down because we're top stitching, and I just want to put some gentle pressure on these 2 edges of the dungarees just to make sure that they stay apart. It can be really difficult sometimes. If you're trying to do this with a dotty fabric, it makes your eyes go really peculiar, or a check sometimes. So just keep stopping and starting and just readjusting where you are. So I'm not yanking the fabric apart, I'm just putting a little bit of gentle pressure on just to make sure that that stitch seam opens up. And as we get down to this part here where it goes round the corner, I'm not going to turn the corner with it. I'm going to bunch up my fabric and I'm just going to concentrate on getting it straight for about 1 centimetre, centimetre and a half in front of the presser foot. Then I'll stitch that bit and then I'll readjust. So you'll see how this works as we go through. So I'm not trying to sort of scoot it round a corner. We're going to just keep the machine going straight and pull the seam so that it's straight and that it's lined up with the same point that we've got. And just by pulling that fabric round gently and just manipulating it out of the way, you'll get a really nice flat seam with no puckers in it. I don't want any puckers in it. And then I'm going to reverse at the end. And get out of our work and put our threads. Go back to the top. Now, where that little bit of seam allowance has just gone a little nog in there, I'm just going to take that off as well while I'm just taking off my threads. And so what we've got here now is we've got our top stitch line just holding that seam allowance through to one side. You can't really see it because of my overlocking being in the way. You just have to trust me that it's there. But then as we come down here, this is going to curve nicely around the child and gives it some shape. But there's no puckers in there, there's no gathering of the thing, it's just the shaping that we've got in that now from the seam that we've just created. So when that goes onto the child and goes round, that'll look lovely. So again, we can just iron this open now and iron it flat, and that will all be really nice for the recipient. So that's all good. Okay, so we're on to the front now. Let's have a look at our... Now, if you're doing the Alex Shorties, this section here is a separate piece. So what you might have to do is you will have a flat section here, and then you'll have a separate strange shaped piece which has got this point on it here. And all you're going to do is at the top here, you're going to lay the yoke over the top of the seam that you've just sewn, stitch it on, and then press it. And then you're just going to press it up, and you get a little, on the Alex Shorties, there's a seam that just runs across the back here. I'm following the Sydney Dungarees and adjusting those, so that's got it built in. I think it's a really nice feature. I wish these had it as well, actually, because I think it's a really nice little design feature. It's perfect for putting a label on if you wanted to. But yeah, that's what you just need to do with yours now if you've got the Alex Shorties. So the next piece you need to get is the front of your dungarees. Let's take the pattern piece off that and pop that to one side. And you're also going to need your curved pocket if you're using one, or your triangle one if you're using that. So we're going to put the pocket just to one side for a moment, because what we're going to do now is put these two pieces of fabric for the front right sides together. And again, we're going to sew down this long seam here towards the crotch point. So let's match our crotch point first. I'll put a pin in there. And then we're going to go up to the top here. And match that point there. Make sure that's all just all lying nice and flat together, because that's going to be the top of our dungarees. That needs to be nice and flat and not at a drunken slant. And then we're just going to do exactly the same as we've just done for our other part of our dungarees. We're going to sew this down first. We're going to press that seam to one side. We're going to open up on the front of the garment and stitch through the seam allowances and one side of the dungarees in one pass. And that will flatten it all out. So I'm going to do that because I don't think you need to see that again. But just remember, you've got your tailor's tacks up here for the front pocket, and we need those. We'll put that pocket on after we've sewn this seam. Okay. Okay. So once we've got our dungarees sewn down the middle and top stitch. That's all looking all lovely and smart. We're going to take our pocket, whether it's the triangle one or another triangle patch pocket or it's the circular one, and we're going to fold it in half so that we get our centre points, top and bottom. And just put some pressure on it with your fingers, that'll just finger press it. And then we're going to lay that lined up with the top of our dungarees with the tailor's tacks we've got for that, but make sure that you're matching it up to the construction stitch line, not to the top stitch line, because the top stitch line is slightly to one side. And when you've got that in place, then we're just going to do what we've done before and just put some pins out to the corners to hold that in place first, making sure it's all nice and flat. Again, making sure that the bottom crease lies on the construction line as well. We're going to put a pin on that point as well, just to hold that into place. Going through all the layers. Now I've still got my pin in that shows me where the opening is, but that's okay, because if we do it on this side we can make sure that closes nicely. So make sure you've got a nice position of that. Let me just put some, I'll put a few more pins in this one, I think, just to hold it down. But you can just see how that rick-racked edge is just picking out the pocket quite nicely. Again, if you wanted to do a piped edge, that looks really nice too. So pop your pins in with the points pointing towards where you're going to be stitching, and then you've got the section where the head's going towards the middle. So that's how mine are looking. See, all the heads of the pins are all just here. Points are all the way around the outside. And we're going to do that same triangular kind of shape in the top corners for that reinforcing, and then we're going to stitch all the way down along the edge, trying to keep to the same seam allowance we used on the back pocket, so we keep everything nice and even and neat. So again, so I'm on a 3 stitch length for my top stitching, but I'm going to move my needle across to the left again. And then that's it. So again, we're going to pop the needle into the work nice and carefully. Turn our speed down as well, because we're top stitching again. I'll do a couple of stitches, probably a few too many there, but never mind. God, it's turned up too much. And then I want to then twist this. So I'm pivoting round. Take that pin out now, because that pocket is secured in that corner. So a couple more stitches across the top here, just to hold that in place. And then we're now going to just follow this pocket round and just pivot it as we go. Nice and steady on this. And again, I'm going quite close to the edge. I'm not going through the rick-rack, I'm going through the edge of the pocket, because that's where we're going to get the pocket most angled in place. And if you wanted to, you could always put a little bit of extra interfacing at the back of where those corners are going to be. Oh, I picked up a piece of pink thread from somewhere, because that will just help it just stay a little bit more robust. It depends how rough and tumble you think the child is who's going to be wearing these dungarees. You can do all of that when you're here. It's like adding, if you were doing the long dungarees, you could add knee pockets if you wanted to, before you construct the main part of the dungarees, so that you've got those knee pads on as well if your child goes through their knees. So you can personalise these as much as you like. Nice and steady. Just pivot as you need to. Just make sure nothing's getting bunched up under your needle as you sew. Keep everything nice and flat. And coming round to where the pocket is open, so I'm going to just be nice and careful here. close up towards this edge. The pin out finally. More stitches kind of going around, I think. A couple of stitches across. And down again to do that little triangle. Needle up. Leave our threads nice and long. We'll do that invisible finishing. And now we're finished with our tailor's tack, so we can take those out, put them to one side. Thread off my fingers. And then this is what it's looking like. So it's all nice and neat. So that's the edge where we had the raw edge, and you can see that's all been caught down, so that's not going to poke out when it's washed. That's good. And then we've got our corners all sewn down neatly, so I'll do those invisibles finishing off on the corners there again, just to make that nice and neat. And you can do the same should you wish. And then we'll come back to the next stage. So the next stage that we need to do now is just go back to the back of our dungarees now and have those in front of you with the pointed section up and the pockets down, because we're going to be working with our straps. The first thing I want you to do is have a look at the end of the straps and make sure that the raw edges on the shorter edge, if you've got the frill, the side that we've not gone along the edge with our top stitching, make sure that that's level, because that can throw out your eye when you're trying to put these in if you're not careful. So I've just got a little smidge that needs to come off, literally just that much on each one, so yours might be the same. Just take that little bit off before you start, because you want these raw edges to be the same. The next thing that we need to do then is we're going to put the straps onto the back of the dungarees. Now, when you're placing these, you need to make sure that you've got, if you're working with a different colour fabric, that the lining side is up, because when these go over on the dungarees and are sewn into the seam, then it will then mean that the right side of the fabric, which you have down when you're sewing them on, is then showing the most. So let me just go through that again. You want your lining side up, and you're going to put the two right sides of your straps, the right side of your strap together with the right side of your actual dungarees. If you've got a frill, you want the frill to the outside of the dungarees. And I've got those probably 1/2 centimetre, 1/4 inch away from the point in the corner. And I'm just going to put a pin on either side of that strap just to hold it in place. Like that. So that's one on. Now the straps are going to actually cross over, so again we're going to do the same thing. So you want the lining side up to you, and you want the frill out to the right hand side, because we're doing the right hand side strap. I'm leaving the same distance again from the point, which is about 1/4 inch, and then I'm going to put a pin in. You just need to be sure that you've got about 1 centimetre spare on your lining, because when you come up here and then you then go across, you need to be able to miss your strap. We want the stitching for the straps only to go through the edges. So I'll probably actually pin this bottom bit of the frill. Can you see how that bottom bit of the frill is sitting over the top of the back of the dungarees? So what I'm going to do is just fold that edge in and then just pin that down well out of the way of my stitching. And I'm just putting it to the strap. I'm not pinning it through into the garment, but that pin will stay out of the way then whilst we're sewing, and the same with this side. But we need that part of the frill there to stay out of the way of our stitching. So again, just through your strap, not through the back of the dungarees. Okay, so that then leaves this side here nice and clear, because we don't want, if we caught the frill into the side, the dungaree wouldn't, the strap wouldn't go up properly. So that's why we need to have that out of the way. So that's what mine's looking like. Let me just put another pin in this side here so you can see. So I might just move, so you want the same distance either side for your straps from the centre point. Not from this top stitching line, from your construction line, and raw edges together. So just adjust those until you've got them right, and as you'll see when I show you just in a second, the straps will actually cross over in front of you like this. So I've got one strap coming across from this side over here, and that's the frills on the outside. So when that, and just mock it up. So when we fold these back over the child's shoulders, they're going to go like that. So we wanted the frills on the outside of these straps. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to put a row of stitches just through that, just to hold those straps in place for us, because that will just make it nice and easy when we come to do the next bit. Just moving my needle across so I can get it onto there. And you're wanting to stay, now just be careful because this all starts to get messed up if you're not careful. And we're just going to stitch just in what will be hidden in the seam allowance. Out, moving your work. So I'm still keeping the pin in that keeps the strap out of the way, but I'm just sewing across the top of these now just to change my speed. I went a bit too fast. Up to the point, and then needle in the work, and then I'm just going to pivot and come down the other side because you want that angled stitching. That's just going to tack those in place whilst we do the next section. Take those threads off. Okay. So there we are. We've got that across there and that one across there, and still got the little frill out of the way. If you've not got the frills, you don't need to worry because that'll just stay out of the way anyway. Just a few loose threads. And there we go. And on either side, you can see we've kept to that point. We're going to locate our back lining piece, and that's the piece with the triangle at the top, which matches where we're going to be stitching. And we're going to lay this over the top. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to match up the point of the lining with the point of the backing just there, the point of the back, and then we're going to then match these up here with the edges, and they should match up perfectly. So the straps are sandwiched between the lining and the main part of the dungarees. And then these should then match across, and we're going to match up the edge here. So just come all the way through down the bottom of the, and we're actually going to sew all the way down to the bottom just here as well. Let's take that loop of overlocking threads off. So this is really doing the underarm seam of the dungarees. So that should all match nicely. And I'm putting my pins at right angles to my seam. So that's one side done, just all along there to the point. And then we're going to come over to this side here. Keep your straps out of the way. So match up the top of the little tab bit, where just by the side of your tailor's tack. That's your orientation. And just put those raw edges together. Now mine's slightly longer, but I'm not going to worry about that. That'll have been in the pattern adjustment that I did when I changed the height of the dungarees. And then finally we can pin the underarm section to fit, so that those all fit together. It all lies together pretty well. Okay, so what we're going to do, so here's our lining, and here's our main part of our dungarees with our straps underneath. And what we're going to do is we're going to start here, we're going to reverse stitch here, all the way up to this corner. We're going to pivot at the corner and come around here, up to this, towards the straps, making sure that we can feel our straps are out of the stitching for the underarm section. We're then going to hit the triangular part as we go across the back of the shoulders where the strips attached, and then we're going to start and come down the other underarm seam, and then we're going to come down these side portions here, which will be the tabs that close the dungarees up. Okay, let's go for it. So 1 centimetre seam allowance on this again. Stitch to the right place, and we're on a 2.2 construction stitch again. So reverse at the start and the end, needle in our work so it anchors it down before we start taking our pins out. we're going to stop about 1 centimetre away from our seam allowance, and we can check that by leaving our needle in our work and twisting it round. So I'm slightly proud, so I'm going to do one more stitch and then try again. Yeah, that's better. I'm happy with that. Make sure your raw edges are, well, your edges, your neatened edges are together. And if you've not neatened your edges together, you could wait until after you'd sewn this seam and then do them. Again, either pinking shears or your zigzag stitch and do it together. As we come down this seam here, I'm just going to pivot slightly. Just making sure that stays nice and struck flat. So we're coming up to this tight section here where the straps are. So let me just move you slightly. So just make sure that you are avoiding those straps. Don't want to sew them into the underarm seam bit. So I'm going to come up to this towards this corner here. Take that pin out for a second, it's getting in my way. Up to the top just here, needle in the work. One more stitch, I think. It's better. Okay, and I'm going to sew up to the point now, to across, because we need to keep that point intact. Just keep sewing until we get to the point. One more set. And then we're going to twist this again and sew down the other side, and this is going through the strap, the other strap. Again, and then we're going to come down this side here. Just pivot on your curve if you need to. Just check that seam allowance down the side because you want it to be the same as the other side. So just pivoted and turned. And we get down to the bottom and then we'll just reverse stitch again just to hold that in place. And trim our threads. While I'm just here, I'm just going to sew my label on as well because I've got a pin in there. I don't want to have that in place. Let me just take that pin out just there. Threads off, right, okay. So what we've got here now is we've sewn up this side here, across the arm, across the straps, and then down the other side and here. Now the other thing that I would suggest you do is just go back again and just do another row of stitches just where those straps are being held in. So literally just the two, just slightly into the seam allowance maybe, but just only 1 millimetre away from where you were stitching before, because that will just help to reinforce those straps. Just make sure they don't go anywhere or don't pull out at all if any of the stitches get snapped. Okay, just done that, so just cut off those threads. Just a belt and braces type thing, that's all. So then what we need to do now is, because this is a curve that is going to have to spread out because this curve is tighter than this one, we're going to do some different kind of snip. So whereas before we've done triangles, this time we're going to snip into the fabric and just 2 or 3 threads away from the actual stitch line, all the way along the underarm seam. And the tighter the curve, the tighter the snips need to be together. It won't affect your neatening. So if you've gone ahead and neatened, and I would neaten before you do these little snips, so either your zigzag stitches or in this case my overlock stitches. If by any chance you go through your stitches by mistake, your construction stitches attaching your lining, just go back and re-stitch that section again, just a millimetre away, just so you miss that. Because what you'll see is that when we then straighten out this seam, all those lines can spread open, and that's what we need in order for this seam to sit flat. So let's do the other side as well. And then what we're going to do is we're going to flip, take off your corners as well, because you don't need your corners. So take off the bulk in the corners. So just taking that corner off like that, look. And again here. I'll have a look at the ones where the straps are and see if it needs taking off there. And we can just check that first before we go ahead anymore. So that's going to push that corner out there, make that all nice and neat. And leave those, take those pins out now, holding the frills out of place, out of the way. And we've got a nice little point at the back there for the back of the dungarees. And yeah, those corners a little bit bulky maybe. Have a little look again. Yeah, I'll probably just take a little bit off those, just the actual corner, because my overlocking is just quite thick there. So, oh, bits going everywhere. This out, and then those straps there are going nicely across to the sides there with a little point inside. And if you wanted to, take your straps right up to the point if you wanted to, but it starts to get a bit bulky, that's all. And then again down the side here, you can pull that line. Did I trim that bit? Doesn't feel like I did, but I did. Okay. Push that through. And then we're going to take this to the ironing board and we're going to press all of this flat. So we're going to make sure that all of this is now sitting flat. And if you want to test how those snips work with your dungarees, then the best thing you can do is leave one side unsnipped and the other side snipped, just as a test, and just run your fingers along them and just see how you feel that seam feels. Because as I say, I think you'll notice a big difference between the two of them. So I've got mine snipped, they're all lying nice and flat. And so we'll take this to the ironing board now and we'll just press this so that lining is all pressing nicely. Again, on your corners, if you need to, take a pin and just gently ease out that corner fabric, just to give you that nice crisp edge that we like to see. The tailor's tack is still there, look, the one that's marking a notch for us, isn't it? And again this side here. If you pull too hard when you've got a pin to do these corners, you'll pull out threads. Then you'll just have to snip those threads off, but you don't want to be doing that if you can help it. Okay, there we go. So this is the back of the dungarees, looking all nice. So I'll just go and press these and then we'll come back. Okay, so the next bit that we need to do after we've pressed these to be flat is that we now need to make sure that the lining fabric doesn't move across into the way of the outside fabric when they're being worn. And there's two ways that we can do this. We can either start at one end and top stitch around the edge here and around and go all the way up and around and do an edge of top stitching around there. Or we can do something called understitching. Now, I like understitching because it's really neat way of finishing something off. But if you're following the top stitch route in that you've got a denim and perhaps you've got also another fabric and you've got a contrast stitching, you might like the added decorative effect of the stitching. With understitching, so you have to choose which one you want to do. So if you want to just top stitch, just make sure you've got all of your edges to the side. Make sure you can't see your lining when you're looking at your garment flat. Start reverse stitch here and then just go all the way round with perhaps a 1/8 of an inch from the edge, and that's all you need to do all the way round and just finish at the same point on the other side. If you'd like to know about understitching, then that's what I'm going to do next, because that's the finish that I like. But as I say, it just depends on which one you like, so you can watch this and make your mind up. So with understitching, what you do is you push your seam allowances towards the lining, and then you put your fabric in flat like this, so that it's open, and you stitch, again, maybe a 1/16 of an inch to an 1/8 of an inch in from the edge onto the lining and through all the seam allowances, and that holds it to one place. The problem is you can't get all the way up into the corners, but as long as you can get as far as you can and then start again on the other side, you'll be able to get a good way through, and that'll hold most of it in place. And I really like this finish. That's what I'm going to do today. So I'm going to put my fabric into my machine. I'm going to move my needle across to the left, so it's just a short distance away. I'm going to reverse stitch from where I start. Just going to take my time, so don't rush with this. And all the time you just want to just put your needle in your work, and then you just want to hold your fabric so that you've got it sort of pulled apart, so like when we were doing the top stitching for the centre front and centre back seams. And I'm just using a 2.2 construction stitch on here. You can take it up to a 3 if you want to, but it's, in theory, it won't be seam because it's on the inside. But what it does is it holds the seam allowance and the fabric to one side. And as I say, you can only get so far, so just get as close as you can and then just reverse stitch just to finish. And take it out. And if we do what we've done before and just pull the threads through to the back. I won't do the invisible finishing as such. I'll just pull my thread through, get a needle, and knot it off and then cut it, because this is inside the lining, you're not going to see this. Oh, I can't get a needle. Hold on 1 second. There we go. So just pull up that thread to pull it in from the other side. And knot those off. And I've only done one little bit at the moment, and I tend to do them as I go along because then you don't miss any bits. So I'll just put 2 or 3 stitches there, and then snip those threads off. I'll snip off my beginning threads, and I'll show you what it looks like. So that's what it looks like. It's just right on the edge, just here. And what it does is, because that holds the seam allowance to one side, it stops the top fabric, it stops the lining fabric from rolling out onto the outside edge. So the next thing that I'll do now is I'll make sure that my seam allowance, and I have clipped that seam allowance as you remember, is sitting under. Go as far back as I can into that pointed edge. This is the pointed edge on the side. And then I'll do the same thing again. I'll do this stitching again, so that it then holds all of that to one side. Again, I can only go so far up into where the straps are, and I'll have to stop. I won't be able to do over the top of the straps here, but I think we're having those 2 rows of stitching on the inside. I won't be too bothered about those, and then I'll start again on the other side here and go down. So that's what I'm going to finish off doing now. So let's pull all of that back out, so untuck it so that we can get into that corner. Make sure all of your seam allowances are across to one side. Looks a little bit fiddly, but you do this a lot on facings, and it makes a fabulous neck edge if you're using a neck facing on a garment. As I say, just start back as far as you can, and I'm probably on top of that, a little bit further back than that. Just slightly back from the notch is enough. Hold on to the edge, onto the threads, reverse, needle in the work, and then just make sure that all of those seam allowances are over to the far side. Just checking that you can see. Just do a bit and then stop again. Just make sure that seam allowance is pulled across. Just makes it neater, because I don't always like the top stitching that you can see on the outside of garments, you know, like on hems and things like that. I prefer a much more kind of finished finish, I suppose, refined finish. So as I say, I can just pull this round a bit more and pull this, just those 2 seams out, and just get up as far as you can. Now when you go no further, just reverse stitch there, because you won't see the stitching, so. And then you can just pull that through and knot it off. As I say, again on this edge here, it just gives it a nice, just push that corner in. So we've not managed to get into the corner, probably about 1/2 inch away from each side of the corner there and there. But then the rest of it has been understitched along that edge there. And on the front, you've just got the lovely, nice curled edge. But you know then that that lining won't ever poke round to the right side of your fabric because it's held in place. And I've managed to get to within maybe 1 inch of the straps as well. So I'll carry on with doing that and do the other side, and then we'll be attaching the lining then to the front of the dungarees. So next thing we're going to do then is just take the front of the dungarees where we've got the pocket and turn them over and put them on our ironing board, because what I'm going to do is I've just got a couple of pieces of spare interfacing, and I am just going to pop those in these top corners of the bib area, which is where we're going to have the buttonholes for our dungarees, and I'm just going to reinforce those areas. So make sure you've got your glue side down, and then we're going to use a press cloth that's hiding from me, and then just using your iron, I'm just going to press that in place just so that it sticks onto that those top corners. So just reinforce it for us and just give us a nice solid base for that dungaree. This fabric is quite light, and so I just want to make sure that that's going to stay there. Okay. Just give it a little blow just before we start moving it around. It does just reinforces those fibres. So next thing that we're going to do now is take the front of our lining, and we're going to line it up on top of the other. Now you might find your lining is just a smidge small, but that's just so that it'll just pull in those two edges. So just match your two centres together. And use your pin to pin that in place. And just stretch it just slightly just to meet those corners. And yes, we've now got interfacing on the lining corners and on the corners of the right side of the fabric as well, just to add that extra support. It actually makes them stitch better, but it also means that as the buttons are being used, I mean, you might use snaps, but I'm going to use buttons on mine because I trust buttons more than I do snaps. But it just holds that all in place for you just a little bit better. And then just down the bottom, just down here. Okay, so that's got all of that pinned onto there. And so we're now just going to sew up the side. Oh, got a thread on me. I'm going to gets a bit electric, doesn't it? Sometimes doesn't want to let go. We're going to sew from the bottom down here. I'll just show you in a second. From the bottom of the lining, we're going to sew up here, around the underarm, across the front, making sure that stays nice and flat, because that's going to be really noticeable on there, especially if you've got a pattern. Just make sure you're following your pattern enough that it's going to look straight as well on your fabric. Down the side here, and then finish at the end here, and I'm going to reverse start and stop and pivot at all of my corners. So let me just get my machine set up and we'll get that started. So I did just check the instructions just quickly, and it says to start just 1 centimetre up from the edge at both sides. So I've started 1 centimetre up and 1 centimetre in. I'm on a 2.2 construction stitch, and I'm on a 1 centimetre seam allowance. I'm going to sew up until this corner, needling my work. Take the pin out when we get there. Then lift the presser foot. Make sure you're still keeping to your 1 centimetre. We're going to pivot round this corner. Straight up into this side here, into the corner. So make sure you're 1 centimetre on your seam allowance. Maybe one more stitch. That's going to be my epitaph, 1 more stitch. Okay, that's better. And then we're going to go straight across the top now. out as we go. And down this underarm seam. Just a nice gentle curve that one is, so we might not need to pivot. I just need to pivot just down the bottom here. And remembering to stop 1 centimetre from the bottom of the lining. And just reverse. We've left out of the work, turn our threads off. And then we're going to take our corners off here, up to our stitching but not through, on both those 2 corners. And then we're going to clip into our curved edge as well, so up to a couple of threads away from the stitches, but we're not going to go through the stitches, just to make this corner here sit, this underarm seam here sit flat. Okay, so I've just clipped off my corners, as you can see just there, to make those turn nicely, and I've also just clipped into the seams that go under the arms, the curved seams on both sides. The next thing you've got to do is be really brave, and this feels really weird, but we've got to do it. So on the front piece, directly at the bottom of the lining, so locate your bottom of your lining, you're going to snip just 1 centimetre in at the bottom of the lining. So hold your lining down flat so you can see what you're doing. I'm trying to do mine so you can see it. And then we're just going to be very brave and just do 1 centimetre snip. Okay, like that. And the same on the other side. Okay, at the bottom of the lining. So it should be up to where your seam allowance is, because that's where you stitched anyway, and that should have been at 1 centimetre. The next thing we're going to do is turn all this all the way around, like we did the other one, into the corners at the top of the dungarees up here, and around the edge. And down the other side. Just move my machine out of the way. And then I'm going to make sure my corners are all out properly. Where's my seam gauge? I like to use that for my corners. And poke those corners out nicely so they're nice and crisp. Do that again in a minute. And then what you can see is that we're on the side where you've done your snip, it allows the fabric to be turned under for the inside for your bodice, but then leaves the seam allowance sticking out. So we're going to work with that in a minute, but for now, so that's why you have to be brave on that bit, because you think, well, why would I want to snip when it doesn't feel like it should be a snip there? But if you don't, you won't be able to turn your fabric around the right way. So get all your corners out, press all of this nice and flat, and then if you're top stitching your lining back, then top stitch, or like me, if you're understitching, then press it first, you get a nice finish, and then go ahead and understitch like you did on the back of the dungarees, and then we'll go on to the next stage. Sorry, we're going to have the top side of our dungarees up, not the bottom side, because we want to have right sides together. So that's laid down on there, and then we're going to lay the lining down so it's right sides together as well. Now, what we need to do is we need to line up these side pieces here. So you've got to be aware of where the hem of your trousers is, and then where these dungarees are going to be, because we want that side bit to be underneath, because that little flat bit here, if you can see, let me see if I can move it over a bit more for you. So I've lined up my hem first, which is going to give me an idea, and put a pin in there. So then follow the leg up and put some more pins in as we go up. because this side seam here is offset slightly. Let me just put, so you're doing your right side, your raw edges of your side seams on the side of the legs together. But what it gives you is this little part here where the flap sits proud. Can you see my top fabric sitting proud of my lining fabric? And that's how it's supposed to be. The tops of these should be there or thereabouts, okay? Because when we fold these out together, we want that to be nice and level at the top there. So that's where that's going to join together with our buttons on the side there. So when we're pinning this, we just need to be aware, pull this down on the work surface, that is how it's going to be. So the little bit where we snipped, the 1 centimetre, is just here. Let me just put my seam gauge underneath it to show you. So there we've got that little 1 centimetre snip just there. This is our neatened edge on the front of our dungarees, and that's the little stick out tab bit on the back of the dungarees. And we're going to go to that point where the dungarees start and stop here. And we're going to start there at a 1 centimetre seam allowance, and we're going to go all the way down to the bottom. So you've got to start at the top there. Let me hold it closer for you, see if you can see. And if it makes it easier, then just pin that top bit as well. We're not going to sew that bit, but it'll make it easy for you to see. So that's what it's supposed to look like at the bottom here. So there's our little snip for our 1 centimetre. There's the top of our lining for our dungarees. And then the seams here match. And let me just see how big that tab is. That tab is 1 1/4 inches I've got. So I've got about 1 1/4 inch of tab sticking out. And this was a size 5 that I've done on width, isn't it? Then we're going to start, and we're going to go through the line. I'm not going to go through the lining on the back. I'm just going to go through the lining on the front. So just leave my back lining out because mine's slightly longer for some reason. But that might be because I black drafted between sizes. Starting at that very part there as snip and doing 1 centimetre seam allowance all the way down, and then I'm going to go onto the other side and do exactly the same again. Just got it lined up, and to do a start off stitching and then reverse. Hold that in place, needling my work, and then just making sure that your seam allowances are all together. And I'm on a 2.2 stitch length because this is construction again. All the way down to the bottom, and then I'm just going to reverse at the bottom just to secure those stitches. And your hems should be level at the bottom. Go all the way to the bottom. Needle out of our work and trim our threads. So if I just show you here now. So there we are, we've got that little bit stitched there right from the start of that snip all the way down through. And my lining was slightly longer, so I did lift that lining out of the way, and that'll hide the stitches. We'll hold that bit down later. So let's turn these dungarees around. So at the moment, the seam between the legs is still open. We've not done anything with that yet, and that's correct. We don't want to work with the hem. We want to work, so match our hem up first, make sure that's all nice and neat. And then I travel up I find it easier to get orientated by travelling up from the hem rather than trying to start at the tab bit. So you might do too, but do it whichever way you feel comfortable, and if you're following the instructions, then you might find you're happy with those. So some very good instructions with lots of pictures. So again, I'm right at the top here, so I'm going to sew from the hem edge this time. And come up, so 1 centimetre seam allowance, reverse stitch, needling my work to hold that all still while I'm messing about with it. got my back lining out the way, but I'm just going to stop at the top of that snip. Pull my needle out. Take off my threads. And the reason why we need to be careful when we're taking off our threads with children's wear, and especially if you think it's in a place it's not going to be seen, is that I looked into this when I was going to be making some children's clothes for sale. And apparently the threads can be a problem because they can wrap around little fingers or little toe joints and start to affect the circulation, and it can be difficult to see them. So any long threads really do need to be really careful with those on children's sewing to make sure that they're definitely kept out of the way. So we're starting to get something resembling a pair of dungarees now. So we've just done those side bits. We've got our front bits here. And when we actually now fold these out right way round, this is the side seam that we've just sewn down this side here, you can see now how nicely that little tab for the buttonholes is going to sit just underneath the fabric, and we'll do a stitch across here just to secure that and reinforce that. But for now, that makes a really nice placket, button placket for your buttons to go onto. So buttonholes will go on this side, and we'll sew our buttons on there, or your press studs, whatever you like, and that will then sit under there and be really lovely. But we'll go on to that bit in the finishing video. This one's all about the construction. So yeah, take that pin out the top there. So let's have a look. I'm going to press this seam towards the back, I think. Where's it going to go towards? No, it needs to go towards the front because of the way of the placket is constructed. So I'm going to push this seam allowance towards the front, and I'm just going to check if that needs to be top stitched at all, because it might do, and I'll come back and let you know. So we do need to press the side of these dungarees, and I am going to press it towards the front. But what I'm using is what's called a sleeve roll or a sleeve ham, because it's used for going inside things, but for children's wear it's really useful. You can use a rolled up towel instead, so don't worry about if you haven't got the right equipment, just use a rolled up towel. And what it does, it just lifts it up so that you can press that without leaning on any of the other fabric. And what we can do then is use our iron to then press that seam open, ready for top stitching, because we're going to top stitch up this side seam and then do a little stitch to close across the top here, but I'll show you about that in a second. So as you can see, that works really well, and I'm just pressing that top section by feeding the sleeve roll into the seam. So let's do the same thing again this side. So that sleeve roll goes in, so it elevates the garment, and we're going to push it towards the front. So make sure you've got all your seam allowance going towards the front, nice and smooth. And then I'm just going to push over that with the iron. It's also very good if you're working with delicate fabrics, because what you can do is, if you were pressing seams open, which we're not on this one, but if you were, you can then use the edge of the sleeve roll, press your seam open, and you're not pressing it onto the delicate fabric either side. You just can press that seam and it just keeps it off the rest of it. So a really useful tool to have. Great Christmas present or birthday present as well. So we're on the side seams here. We can see our pocket is here, and we can see the tab is pushed to the inside, to the lining, so the bit where the buttons are going to go is going to be pushed on the inside. And what we're going to do is we're going to start at the hem, and then we're going to go up to where that cut was made in the fabric, which is just there. So I'm just going to put a pin to remind me of where we're going up to. We're going to go slightly above that, literally just by 0.5 centimetre or so. We need to be catching down both bits of the lining. So you want to make sure you're going up enough to cover that. And then we're going to, once we get up to there, we're going to pivot, and then I'm going to do a little zigzag stitch, narrow zigzag stitch across here. A bit like you see on jeans sometimes when they're doing the flies and what have you. And that's just going to do a decorative bit to hold this bit closed so that we can then have that reinforcement for where these are going to be put on and off. So I'm going to leave that pin there, check where my lining is. My zigzag needs to be up towards the yellow pin, but from the red pin I know that's where we're starting to be onto the bit where it was cut. So let's have another red pin here. Just pop that just there. and then by looking inside I can see the top of my lining, so I want that to lie flat, and then I want that to be where the fabric, where the second pin goes. So it's about a half centimetre, isn't there, just over between those 2 points. So I'm going to zigzag here because there's going to be no pressure. The top stitching will keep that snipped edge nice and secure, and then these little zigzag here will just sort that out for us. So let's get on and do that. Put my things out of the way. Sewing machine. So again, we've got plenty of room to work in these trouser legs. That's really good. So let's put my stitch onto position number 6. So that was the same as I've used for all my top stitching, and we're on a top stitching stitch now, so we need to be on a 3. So let's reverse, come back, switch my speed down and needle in my work because we are top stitching. And now what you've got to be careful of is just make sure you've got the bulk of your dungarees towards you, so that you're not going to be stitching one part of your dungarees to the other. I'm just going to do this top stitching maybe a little bit quicker than that, but just keeping that seam nice and flat. And again, this reinforces those seams, as we know, makes them nice and strong for us. And coming up the side, just make sure again you've not got anything underneath that you shouldn't have. Coming up to our pins now. So now we want to make sure that things are lying flat and lying right. So I'm just going to tuck my lining down underneath and make sure that's all nice and straight. I'm going to lift up my presser foot just so that I can make sure things are underneath quite nicely. Just put your hand inside. You can just feel where you are. Okay, so it's a bit bulky here, so just take your time. Just nice and slow. So we know onto the red that's where the fabric is we're starting to get onto the snip bit. We want to do a little bit higher than that to where the green pin is. And what I want to do is I want to lift my presser foot up with my needle in my work and turn it 90 degrees, making sure everything's all staying all nice and flat underneath. And you can feel the end of where your lining is underneath here. It's about 1 inch, isn't it? So let's hold on to that. 1.25 inches we said, didn't we, before, but about 1 inch will do. And then what I'm going to do is, now I've got I know which direction I want to go in, I'm going to lift my needle up, because what I want to do is change over to a zigzag stitch, and I can't do that while my needle's in my work. So I'm going to go onto my stitches and choose my number 8. I'm going to do the stitch width, which is the zig and the zaggy bit. I'm going to take that down, just down to a 1. 1.5, and then I'm going to take my stitch length down to 0.3. Okay, so I'm on stitch number 8, which is the zigzag. The width of the zig and the zag is 1.5, and then the length of the zigzag is 0.3, and it's going to give us what's called a satin stitch, which is a very close stitch together, but a zigzag. I'll show you when I've finished and you'll see what I mean. So now we're ready with that. Let me just go across and just do that. Quite a slow stitch, but it is doing it. It's very strong. That will do, I think. So I'm just lift my seam up and leave some long threads because we're going to do that invisible finish again. And let me show you what that looks like. So can you see it just there? So it's just that stitch along there, very, very narrow zigzag, but it's just really reinforced that edge and just made it nice and stiff. So there's nothing's going to tear that apart now at that lining point. It's all nice and secure. So let's have a look now and do the next bit. So I'm going to leave it there for now because I think this video is going to be long enough, and I'm having problems uploading them from here in France while we're staying temporarily in this sheet. So hopefully I can get this part 3 loaded up for you where we've covered most of the construction. So our dungarees are coming on really nicely. We've got our straps attached, we've got our pockets attached, we've got our little plackets on the side for doing our button closures, and we've just got to finish the inseam, and I'm going to show you how to finish that and attach buttons to that so that you can have that open if you want to. If not, we're just going to finish it as a normal seam, but we'll cover that in the next part, and then we'll cover how to do the buttons and the buttonholes, because I do mine slightly different as well. You're starting to hear that quite a lot, aren't you? In that I change the position of the buttons and the buttonholes to the ways that, because I don't like my straps coming over the top, I want mine going down behind the back. So we'll cover all of that, and we'll get everything finished off. But we're very close, looking like some dungarees now. Really looking sweet. So I hope you're pleased with what you're doing so far. I hope you're really enjoying the extra little tips and techniques that I'm giving you. Hopefully you feel too that they're going to elevate your sewing in the finished garment, and that it's going to be something that you're going to be really happy to put your name to. So hopefully that's, I keep saying hopefully. I do hope that you're enjoying it. I really genuinely do. I thoroughly enjoy myself showing you what I do and how I do it, and I just hope you enjoy it too. So that's it for now for part 3. If you're not a subscriber already and you have enjoyed this series, I'd really appreciate it if you would just hit the subscribe button. Yes, it makes my numbers go up, but it's not about that. It's about the fact that YouTube then know that this is a video that people are liking, and so they'll push it out to more people. And the more people we get sewing, then the more wonderful a place the world will be, in my opinion anyway. So that's the reason why I would like to do that if we can do, and also it gives me a thrill if you've enjoyed it. So leave a comment down below, let me know how you're getting on with your dungarees, let me know if you've got stuck with anything, let me know if I've not explained anything properly, because I can answer those questions in the bottom in the comments below. Or if you've been a follower of mine for a while, you might be interested to know that I've also got a Facebook group. And so I cover, it's a bit more interactive than YouTube can be, because you can post pictures and show me what you've been doing. And also you can ask recommendations of patterns or of techniques. And we can just be a bit more two-way really than just being on YouTube and me just showing you what to do. There's a link in, if you look in the banner photo on a laptop screen, you'll see my a link to the Facebook group. I usually put it in the description below as well. And then if you can't find it there, just look up Sewing by Claire Sewing Support Group, and hopefully I'll come up for you then, and then you can click to apply, answer the questions just to keep scammers out really, and then we can then sort out and have you there as a member as well. So we can say hi and see how you're doing, and you can show me pictures of your dungarees. Have a great day everybody. See you soon. Happy stitching. Bye.